بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to get together and discuss something very important about Islam. As you know, tonight is also a special night. It's the night of the demise of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore it's very relevant to discuss tonight a very important feature in the message of the Prophet, and that is about rationality. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance, and I hope inshallah you would write down if you have any question from before or about what I say, and we can discuss it afterwards. At the beginning, I have to admit that this is very broad and deep topic, and it needs a course. We have had many dissertations. When I was head of Department of Religions at Imam Khomeini Education Research Institute, we had many dissertations on this topic from different perspectives, and many of them were comparative. So if a little bit the discussion is abstract or theoretical or dry, as we call it, so please bear with me. Is the sound okay? Okay. So, trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking for His guidance, we start with this. First of all, why rationality is important for us? If someone says why we should bother about rationality, we can do everything that we like. Unfortunately, this is a trend that now people, sometimes instead of backing up their decisions or their actions with some kind of explanation or justification, they just say, this is what I like. And the misunderstood liberalism also would permit that you do just what you like. But we think this is not actually what suits human beings. Among all the beings that we have in this physical world, I'm not talking about the hidden world, I'm not talking about angels, I'm not talking even about jinns, because I'm talking right now with everyone, believers and non-believers. Among all creatures, all beings in this physical world, human beings have this characteristic that in addition to just continuing their life, they can form beliefs. Each person from early childhood starts forming beliefs about himself or herself and the world around. And this is something that without any exception you can find in all cultures, all ethnicities all over the world. We form beliefs about ourselves and about the world. All the time. If you look at trees or flowers or plants or water or stone, even if you look at birds or other animals, they are not like us. Even those which have some form of intelligence, it's not enough for them to relax, to get away from day-to-day affairs and start thinking deeply about themselves and the world around them. Therefore, you don't find, for example, a bird which is very pleased with itself or a bird which is displeased with itself. A bird which admires itself or a bird which is critical of itself. The same about the world around them. You don't find a bird which is optimist or pessimist. They are just what they are. But human beings have this ability that they can form beliefs about themselves and others, everything. But forming beliefs brings a very important question. On what basis you are forming these beliefs? We are able to produce beliefs based on realities, but through our own understanding of realities, or we can sometimes just start imagining the world, and sometimes we so much immerse in our imagination that we live in an imaginary world and we don't know. Actually, I think most of us live in the world that we have created. And it's very difficult to find two people who live in exactly the same world. Because more than being objective, we have been imagining things, and over time we have created a mindset for ourselves that gives us certain understanding of the world. Like, individuals. Many times our understanding of individuals is not exactly what those individuals are. And you have to be very careful not to judge quickly, not to quickly believe in people or quickly reject people, because you can make mistakes. This is about even one individual, let alone about all people, all world, our relation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our relation with community, with society, with humanity, what is happening in politics, what is happening in economy. All these things are cluster of the beliefs that over time we have built. If you are very lucky, maybe 60, 70, 80% of it would match the reality. It's not very common to have people who have 80%, 90%, let alone say 100%. Yes, Ma'sumin have 100% correct understanding of people and the world. But most of people, if the majority of ideas, if 70%, for example, 75% is there, it's excellent. So, we form beliefs. These beliefs are supposed to be based on realities, but we don't have direct access to realities. It goes through our mind, our imaginations. Therefore, a very important question here comes. What is the accepted procedure for evaluation of the beliefs? What is the accepted procedure for evaluation of the beliefs? Something that if I follow and you follow, then at least we can communicate, we can let our worlds interact and live in a common world. It's very important because somehow we need to interact. I cannot live in my own world, you in your own world, and all the time fight each other. We have to open our worlds to each other and communicate. What's the way? There are only two things that help us here, and these are very relevant. Rationality and communication. Actually, these are two sides of the same coin. This one. Rationality and communication may look to you irrelevant, but indeed these are two sides of the same coin. And it's very interesting that when Aristotle wanted to define human beings, he defined human beings by two things. One was to be animal, and second was to be rational. For him, human beings are rational animals. Muslim philosophers, when they translated Greek philosophy and logic into Arabic, instead of saying human beings are al-haywanul aqil, he said al-haywanul natiq. They used nutq instead of aql. Why? Because logos in Greek means intellect, but at the same time it refers to language. So the understanding of Muslim philosophers and logicians, what? You can only speak if you are rational. And if you are rational, you have to speak. This is why I say rationality and communication come along with each other. It's very important. Inshallah, later I will mention my standards for rationality. A very important standard for rationality is that you must be happy to engage with discussion. Any person who is afraid of discussing and sharing and talking, there is a weakness here. If you are worried to talk and discuss, means you are maybe even unknowingly hiding a weakness. Because there is nothing rational unless it can be communicated. Inshallah, we'll talk about it. So, in order to make sure that we are letting our worlds open to each other and interact and then live in a common world, we need to be using intellect and communicate. This is why rationality is so important. The only thing that can bring agreement among us is intellect. Nothing else can bring agreement. We are surrounded with lots of differences. The only thing that exists that Allah has given us so that me and you can exchange, can communicate, can interact, and then try to come to agreement is aql, is intellect. Also, the only thing that can help us to make sure that we have proper understanding of the realities, of the facts, of the whole world is aql. We have perception, we have some forms of understanding other than aql, but in the end, all of them rely on aql. Even, inshallah, I will explain, even revelation in the beginning, in the first place, needs to be verified by aql. Otherwise, many people may claim that I received revelation. We have many people in the course of history, even after Islam, who were called mutanabbi, means they claim to be prophets. They claim that they received revelation. How can you check these claims? You need intellect. So, the question of rationality is very important because it's the way to make sure that we believe as a human, we act as a human, we interact as human beings with maximum understanding of realities. Maybe we cannot understand 100% of the realities. For ordinary people, this is not possible. Masha'un, peripatetic philosophers, had this as the aim of philosophy. Their understanding of insan kamil, perfect man, was to have maximum 100% understanding of the whole world. They used to say the aim is sayruratul insan alaman aqlaniyan mudahiyan lil alam al ayni. In your understanding, in your mind, you should become similar to the whole world. Everything which is outside, you should have proper understanding inside, then you become insan kamil. So for them, this maximum understanding was the highest achievement of humanity. So, this is not something that most of people have. If some people have achieved, it's very rare among ordinary people, not people who are equipped with godly knowledge. Among people whose knowledge comes through learning and teaching and at school, this is not common to have this type of knowledge. But what is at least expected is no matter how much you know, you are a rational person. If you are a rational person, it means you are a person who can drive. Maybe you have not driven all over the world, but at least you are able to drive carefully and safely. This is the main thing, that you are able to drive carefully and safely. Then inshallah, little by little, you go to different destinations. So to be rational is the first thing, the first step that every person has to make sure that they achieve. This is why in the Hose, when we go to Hose, one of the very early lessons that we take is on logic, mental. We study logic in different levels to make sure that our reasoning, our way of understanding concepts and forming arguments are rational. Okay. Now, let's bring this discussion of rationality into religion. There are different positions among philosophers of religion about this issue. But before that, I should explain what do we mean by philosophy of religion and who are philosophers of religion. You may already know theologians, mutakallamun. Philosophers of religion are different from theologians. from mutakallim. Mutakallimun or theologians are people who affiliate to a religious tradition. For example, they are Muslims, they are Christians, they are Jews, they are Hindus, they are Buddhists. And based on that tradition, they try to argue for the doctrines of that religion, to defend those doctrines against objections, and to explain them. So there are three major tasks for theologians. For example, a Muslim mutakallim, whether it be Sunni, Shia, the role of mutakallim, theologian, is to argue for their doctrines, to defend against attacks and objections, and to be able to explain them. Because sometimes explanation of these doctrines need someone who is expert. For example, what does isma mean? What does bada mean? What does raja'a mean? It needs someone to be expert, to be able to bring not arbitrary definition, not arbitrary, but something based on the sources. So this is a mutakallim, a theologian. But philosopher of religion is the one who does not necessarily belong to a religious tradition, or even if he or she belongs to a religious tradition, he tries or she tries not to act as a believer, not to speak on behalf of the faith, tries to stand in a distant place and look at all faith and rationalize the process of believing. What do they believe? What does it mean? Is there any conflict, any contradiction? Are they consistent or not? So philosophers of religion are people who from outside look at religion. Whether this is good or bad, it's something else. Whether they have always been helpful or not, that's another issue. Whether a theologian at the same time can be a philosopher of religion, it's another issue. We don't want to go into this discussion. But what is important is this is one of the most important questions today among philosophers of religion, among, you can say, philosophers who reflect on religions in general. They talk about all religions. What is the place for reason in religion? How rational are religious claims, religious beliefs? This is a very important question. I can refer to three major views, and then inshallah we'll try to get to Islam. One famous view is known as fideism. Fideism is the idea that you just believe. You don't need to first find arguments. There is no place for reason in verification of religious claims. Later, reason can help us inside religion. No one has a problem with that. But to say that I don't believe unless there is rational verification, according to fideists, is wrong. Why I should depend my faith on reason? Reason should be inspired and educated and cultivated by my faith, not the other way around. Therefore, some people had the idea that, and still in the world some people have this idea, some religious communities, that first you believe and then you know. You must first believe and then you know. You don't need to prove for yourself that God exists. This is the scripture that God has sent to us so that you believe. When you have some initial acceptance, when you see something makes sense, try to believe in it and practice it and live by it. Give it a trial. And then, little by little, you will come to appreciate, and then you will come to become certain. You will become certain. This is not a very bad thing, but it doesn't meet our standards. But there are many, many people who believe in this. For example, they say to believe is to jump into faith. You have to take a risk and jump. If you want to be first 100% sure, you would never be able to form conviction. This is a belief which is very common among some faithful people, especially in Christianity. There are people who have this idea. Not all Christians, but there are Christians who have this idea, and they say there is no problem in having something which doesn't pass through rational examination. Indeed, they say religion many times has to be coming with mysteries. There are mysteries, and if you accept these mysteries, then you become a faithful person, and then you will be, over time, convinced. Why they have developed this idea, I don't want to enter into that discussion. This is a good discussion, but there is no time. What has led them to this position? So, this is the idea which is known as fideism. Another idea is called critical rationality. Critical rationality is one step away from fideism, but still different from a strong rationality. Critical rationality means that I am not able to use reason, I'm not able to use aql to form my faith. Because they are very much troubled by doubts which are created, especially after the Enlightenment. And many philosophers in the West, they have lost their hope in certainty, in the sense that they are not able to prove something 100%. Some of us who are not familiar with the ideas of these philosophers, we think maybe they have problem with religion only. But indeed they have problem with everything. Even they have problem with science. There are philosophers of science who believe that not only science is not certain, they say even science is not most probable. The only thing is that science is rational because there is a way to falsify. If you are familiar with someone like Popper, his idea is that rationality of science is because it is just something that you can falsify. There is a way to show that this is wrong. So as long as something can be proved to be wrong, and it is not yet proved to be wrong, it's rational to believe in it. So even about science, they say like this. So it's not that they have problem only with religion, they have problem with any kind of certainty, any kind of even high likelihood. So based on this, they say We are not able to prove something to be 100% true, but still we have to check something in order to believe. We cannot say just you believe and later you come to know. So this is called critical rationality. Means you try to assess and evaluate to see if there is anything wrong in this idea or not. Two things especially are very important to avoid. One is if something internally is not consistent. Many times people try to show that what you say in itself is contradictory. Your ideas are not consistent inside. Or, second thing, they are not coherent with the rest of your beliefs. So either internally or externally there is conflict. But they say you can say something which is consistent and coherent, so it is rational, but still maybe not 100% proved to be true. So this is one way of rationality. Our understanding is even more than this. In Islam, especially in the way that we understand Islam, in the school of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam, and also some other Muslims who are like us, who have intellectual approach to Islam, we are not fideists. We are not even thinking that critical rationality is enough, although it is a good step forward, but that's not enough. We say that you have to actually be able to argue rationally for your faith. You cannot believe in something and just because it is true, you say, it's fine, it's enough. For example, we all know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there. But we don't accept from someone to say, I just believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want to bother about arguments and discussion. I just believe in Him. This is not acceptable. You have to be rational. And your rationality for us can be verified if your beliefs are backed up with arguments. We don't say you have to be a theologian or philosopher, but at least you should have an argument that can convince you and people at your level. Those who are experts, they can convince everyone. But at least me and you, we should see our own level and see who are in our level so that we can convince them. We are not Allama, we are not a great philosopher, but people at our level, we have to be able to convince them. Why we have to be able to convince them? Because we have to be able to convince ourselves and defend ourselves from their challenges. Otherwise, it's not a matter of you want to discuss with them or you don't want to discuss with them. Because whether you like it or not, the questions come, the objections come. You have to fortify your faith. So, if you look at every Risala Amaliyah, you see that they mention, when it comes to your aqa'id, when it comes to your beliefs, you cannot do taqleed. You cannot say, I believe in God, I believe in Islam, I believe in the school of Ahlul Bayt, because my marja says this. This is not acceptable. Even if you so much respect and trust your marja that whatever he says, you really think that it's true, we don't accept it. Why? Because you have to be able to argue for it. You have to be able to establish it. So, our expectation is very high. If someone is concerned about Islam being rational or not rational, actually even much less than what we do is enough to be rational. As I said, many philosophers in the world, they just think that if something is probable and not falsified yet, it's rational. As long as people have not proved 100% that this is wrong, it's rational. I was reading some very recent articles recently about rationality in Western philosophy, and some people say actually it's enough for rationality that if something leads to good results. And I think no one can doubt that good faith helps people in their understanding of themselves, understanding the world, making better relations, being hopeful, being peaceful, being tranquil, being kind. If there is good faith, it helps. So they say even leading to good results is enough for rationality. So our standards are so high that we meet any expectations for rationality. Now, what I would like to share with you is first, few requirements of rationality in my understanding, and then, inshallah, I will mention some of the teachings of Quran and Ahlul Bayt about rationality. And maybe in this session we are not able to start an argument for our beliefs, but this can be followed by other discussions of your own study about every principle of our faith. Every doctrine that we have has this rational backup. And you should never be thinking that by avoiding questioning or asking or studying you are a better mu'min. Some people think if I'm a mu'min I should not ask questions because it's a sign of weakness. If I say why this is true, why that is true. No, this is not a sign of weakness. This is a sign of you being rational. But what is important is that you ask in order to understand, not in order to run away from responsibility. Sometimes I ask because I don't want to commit. I create questions. Like, we say the questions of Bani Israel about the cow. They didn't want to slaughter the cow, so they kept asking the size, the color, the shape. And the Quran says, "Zabahuha wa ma kadu yaf'alun." Even at the end, although they slaughtered, but it was very likely that they would not do it because they were not in heart committed. But anyone who has really questioned about anything, about God, about Prophet, about the Quran, about Imam in general, Imam Mahdi in particular, we appreciate, we welcome. I remember when I went to the Hawza, and actually my reason for going to Hawza was to find out answers for my questions. I had no other reason for going to the Hawza. No one in my family was cleric, and no one was encouraging me to go to Hawza because I was in a special school for people who go to science or medicine. But I decided to go to Hawza because I had lots of questions about God, about the truth of Islam, and I used to read, I used to ask people around, they were not convinced. I used to buy with my pocket money always books. I had a cupboard of books when I was 13, 14. And I just reading and not convinced. Because, to be convinced, you need also to have some background. And also, there should be someone who is higher than you who can answer all your questions. So I had difficulty in finding someone who can convince me. And I decided to go to the Hawza. So I left my school. Even I told my father I don't want to finish my high school. So they asked me to give promise that later I finish high school. So when I was 17, I went to Qom. And then I finished my high school. And from the beginning, I was studying philosophy, theology, aligned with other subjects. Then I studied Western philosophy. Until today, I am thinking. I am always thinking. So Alhamdulillah, I can say I didn't take my faith from someone else. I really worked for it. I really tried my best. I tried to leave everything behind and go away for learning. So I remember in the first 2 years after Hawza, sometimes I was thinking, am I a believer or not? Because I have still lots of questions. And for me, at that age, I had to start arguing for the existence of God and be able to answer to my own questions. So I was, questioning myself to see whether my arguments can stand against my criticisms or not. So I very well remember one Thursday afternoon, I was in the Hawza and I was thinking, am I a believer or not? I'm Hawza and I am thinking and I am practicing everything, but I was thinking, maybe I'm not a believer because I'm not able to make sure my argument is 100% solid. So I went to house of one of ulama, who is a marja now, but at the same time he has many books on aqaid and he has studied philosophy along the Batwai. So I told him, I have this problem. And he said, don't worry. This is the sign of your iman. And then he mentioned that another person who is now also a marja, when he was very young, he said, because they were together, he said sometimes he used to cry about the questions that he had. But he kept studying. So it was a big reassurance for me to hear that these problems are not, contradicting being faithful. Later I found this also in the hadith. So I'm saying this because I want no one to feel that if you have questions, this is a bad thing, or we are worried. Actually, another person who was my teacher, when I told him I have these problems, he told me, if you don't have this problem, then you cannot become a great scholar. You become a great scholar if you really have this stage in your life. That all your ideas and beliefs, you feel that you have to rebuild them and restore them. So, we have no problem at all with asking questions. Actually, the Quran says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. If you don't know, you should ask. But ask people who know, not ask someone who doesn't know. Because sometimes people mention their problems to people at their level or lower. This has no benefit for them and can confuse also other people. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ. Not فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الْجَهْلِ أَهْلَ الْقَفْلَةِ. Ask people who know if you don't know. If you know, don't ask. Just put it into practice. But if you don't know, ask. So, no problem at all. Any question has its answer. But some answers are direct, some are indirect. If you ask about aqaid, and this is a principle, then the answer can be direct. But if it's something derivative, then it can be through some principles. If you ask about a fiqh issue, it can be through ijtihad or taqlid. But there is methodology, there is rationality, there is a way to reach that. Direct or indirect. Allama Tabatabai Rahmatullah Alayhi says, we don't have in the Quran even one ayah which says you must accept something blindly. No, even one ayah. Just believe and don't ask for any explanation, any reason. On the other hand, we have about 300 verses at least that encourage us to think, to argue, to ponder, to reflect, to use our intellect. Unfortunately, some people, for example, say, if we should not follow blindly, so why we do taqleed? Taqleed is not following blindly. Taqleed has its own reasoning. Taqleed means someone who is not expert verifies first that someone is expert and is actually the most qualified expert, is also pious, and then follows it. This is very rational. It's not to follow blindly. To follow blindly means I follow someone without that person being qualified. But if that person has more knowledge than any other expert, let alone than me, and is pious, if I follow him, this is very rational. So, what are the requirements for rationality? This is the way I think we can break down different standards for rationality, and I think we can have all of them in Islam. First, to be consistent, there must be no contradiction. Let me see how much time I have. Okay. Inshallah, I will try to finish in about 10 minutes so that we can have discussion. First, it must be consistent. No belief can be accepted if someone can show there is contradiction. There must be no contradiction inside. And also it must be something which is matching the rest of your beliefs. If you say something, for example, about God, which contradicts what you say about, for example, freedom of human beings, it's a problem. So it has to be consistent and it has to be also coherent with your entire belief system. This is something that it's easy to show to people, that what you say suffers lack of consistency or coherence. Another thing is that to be rational, either you have to show that this is self-evident, and if it is self-evident, then many people should accept it. I'm not saying everyone, because in logic we studied that sometimes people who are confused by something, they may not even accept things which are self-evident. Marxists, for example, they used to deny the principle of contradiction. They used to say there is no problem if there is contradiction. Although everyone knows that the principle of contradiction is self-evident. Two contradictory things cannot both exist. So, if something is self-evident, at least there must be many people who accept it. And they accept that it doesn't need explanation. But if it is not self-evident, then you as a rational person are required, are supposed to bring something along with your belief as a backup. If you say, I don't want to discuss, I don't want to say anything, I don't want to comment, this shows that this is not rational. You must be able to bring something along with your belief. I'm not saying necessarily bring a rational, intellectual, philosophical argument, but there must be something. It cannot be something which by itself you accept without being self-evident. Why this is important? Because then we can look into that evidence that you are using. So first you have to accept that you must bring some evidence, some backup, some argument for it. But then inshallah we can look into it. So people who are rational in their beliefs, they are able to show that either this belief is self-evident or they have come up with this belief through a procedure, through a way of forming this belief which can be shared with other people. This being shareable is very, very important. Human beings must be able to share with each other the way they form their beliefs. Maybe I cannot share with you my belief, but I can share with you at least how I have come to this belief, so that you can also go. For example, an Arif. An Arif may not be able to communicate his mystical experience to me. He cannot transfer it to me. But he can tell me how he reached that point, how this happened. He must be able to discuss it. It's the minimum. Another thing is that anything which is rational has to be useful. The Quran very beautifully explains that the example of haqq and batil, truth and falsehood, is like the example of rain coming and then flowing over the land and becoming like a flood. Sure. Forming flood, and then on top there are lots of bubbles. These bubbles cover the surface of water. They don't let you see anything else. But they are void. They are empty. This is the example of batil. And Quran says this goes away. أَمَّا الزَّبَدُ فَيَذْهَبُ جُفَاءً أَمَّا مَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. What benefits people remains in the earth. That is water. So, anything which is rational, it would be useful, it would be beneficial. If someone has not any way to understand his lack of rationality, at least can see how much his lack of rationality has, produced problems. Those who are not rational, they are normally people who are not liked, who are not welcome. They cannot have endurable relation. They cannot have, productive life. They suffer from either, lack of confidence, or they become too much arrogant. They become sometimes radical. So, lack of rationality produces lots of problems. On the other hand, rationality produces productivity and benefits. This is the sign of haqq. For us, above all these things, rationality means you have to have proof. You have to have certainty. Yaqeen for us is very important. Maybe no religion like Islam emphasizes on yaqeen, on certainty. For us, certainty is very important. You have to be able to block the way for any doubt. 100% you have to be sure. Other people don't expect this much of rationality. For them, much less than is enough. But for our own standards, we need more of anyone else, and we need to be certain. Okay, I wanted to talk about the way Quran and Hadith talk about rationality, and also I wanted to talk about the role of reason in religion, in which areas reason helps us. But I don't have time. I just refer you to some lectures I have had in the past, and maybe inshallah we can have follow-up lecture. I had a series of 11 lectures on Imam Kazim on intellect in the Shrine of Lady Ma'soom, on a beautiful hadith Imam Kazim had for Hisham ibn Hakam. So those lectures explain the position of rationality. I also have had different lectures on rationality being one of the characteristics of Shia Islam, along with the spirituality and search for justice. In many places also I have discussed this. So if you want to know more, you can refer to those discussions about rationality. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this opportunity. And now, if you have any questions, any comments, inshallah we can receive them. And inshallah, if you can make sure that everyone receives their portion of that. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.